What's happening, y'all? Welcome inside the Fantasy Stock Exchange. Bush coming at you solo today to break down everything that you need to know for 2022 playoff best ball. I'm going to cover everything from basic rules, strategy, roster construction, and playoff scenarios so that you guys can go into these playoff best ball tournaments on Underdog Fantasy or maybe some of these other sites. I'm assuming you guys clicked on this video because you intend to play playoff best ball, or maybe you're just curious. If you are on the fence, this is the single most fun way that you can get a slice of the action during the NFL playoffs. What you're essentially doing is predicting who you think will be in the Super Bowl and predicting some of the highest scoring fantasy performances along the way. I'll cover everything once we get into the video, but before we get into it, leave a like if you guys enjoy, comment down below any of your thoughts, subscribe to the channel if you are new. Any comments and questions you have, I can answer down below as well. But before we get into it, let's hit the intro. Okay, so before we get into the nitty-gritty of this video is brought to you by Underdog Fantasy. It is the single best place to play playoff best ball this winter. They have the mitten contest, which is a $5 contest with $15,000 to first place, and their gauntlet contest live right now as well. $25 entry with $100K to first place, $1 million in total prizes. Those are both live at the moment. If you guys want to get some shots into these big prizes, you can sign up using the promo code FSE. And you'll get a 100% deposit match back up to $100. So if you put in, let's say $100, you'll get $25 mitten entries for your deposit, and you'll be rewarded with a free 20 entries or maybe 4 $25 gauntlets if you want to mix it up. And also a special promotion that we are going to be running from now until Saturday, which is Christmas Day. If you use our promo code FSE, we will be giving away 5 free $50 site credits to people that use our promo code from now, Tuesday, as I'm recording this, to Saturday on Christmas Day. And we are not a big channel, so a high chance for you guys to win those contests. We only had about 20 people sign up last time we did one of these giveaways, so there's like a 25% chance that you'd actually win. So using our code, you could essentially get up to 6 free gauntlet entries or 30 free mitten entries. But now let's get right into the video. What is playoff best ball? If you guys have no idea what playoff best ball is, you're just watching because you support the channel and you want to hear more about it. Playoff best ball is just that. It's playoff best ball. It's best ball during the NFL playoffs, where there's a big tournament going on where you're drafting a team for the actual NFL playoffs. These are the rules for the gauntlet tournament on Underdog. Basically, you're drafting now for fantasy points earned during the actual NFL playoffs. There are 4 rounds to this contest: wild card, divisional, conference championship, and then eventually the Super Bowl. To advance, you must be the top scorer in each round. So there's going to be 4 rounds of the playoffs. They're not cumulative. You get points for the wild card round, and if you win your 6-man league in the gauntlet, or if you come in first or second in the mitten, then you will advance to the next round, which will be then the divisional round. And then if you win that round in the gauntlet, then you advance to the conference championship, so on and so forth, until there's eventually, I believe, about 200 people in the Super Bowl tournament. The goal of this is basically to predict who ends up making the Super Bowl, because as NFL teams are eliminated from the actual NFL playoffs, those players on your roster will no longer be scoring points. So if you draft, let's say, 6 players from one team and they get eliminated in the first round, then you lose all 6 of those players and that entry is essentially dead. So the only distinction, like I said, in the gauntlet, you need to win your 6-person draft to move on to the next round. In the mitten tournament, you need to be first or second just in round 1 in your 6-person draft, and then it eventually goes and follows the same format. So basically, this would directly impact teams like the Eagles, who are on bye, and either the Bills or the Chiefs, because you will not have those players for the first round. So the strategy comes in where you want to get those great players and those great teams that have a good chance of making the playoffs and making the Super Bowl onto your rosters, but you also don't want them to kill your teams by putting up no points in the first round. So I'll cover all that as we get through. Hopefully you guys are following along so far. Like I said, if you have any questions, leave them down below in the comments. We're going to start with general strategy, and I think it's important to know the playoff picture if you guys are doing these drafts now in week 16, because things can change, right? We will be talking about this later today when we're in Buffalo. We're going to be doing drafts, so make sure you guys stay tuned for the live stream that we do, because if you draft, let's say, a Cowboys and Buccaneers stack without paying attention to, the playoff seeding, those 2 teams are likely to play each other in the first round. So you're limiting your chances of advancing to the grand prize round, the Super Bowl tournament, if you draft a lot of Cowboys and Buccaneers, because half of those players will no longer be useful after the first round. The other important thing to note is while teams like the Washington Commanders, for example, who are currently in possession of the 7 seed in the NFC, a team like this might sneak into the playoffs, but how likely are they to advance beyond the first round and eventually make the Super Bowl? That's some things that you got to work out as well. There's definitely advantages to drafting now in week 16, while there's still some uncertainty and you can get some unique builds and textures going. But there's also some disadvantages knowing that teams that draft in week 17 or week 18 or, right before the playoffs start will know who exactly is in the playoffs, which teams to avoid, so on and so forth. And speaking of the Super Bowl, there is no reward for drafting the team that wins the Super Bowl, as both teams that play in the Super Bowl will be registering fantasy points. So it doesn't matter if you predict who wins the Super Bowl. The goal is to predict who's actually playing in the Super Bowl from the NFC and the AFC. So now let's get into team construction. And basically with team construction, you have 10 roster spots in these tournaments. In terms of team construction, you will start one quarterback, one running back, two wide receivers / tight ends, and one flex option. And each draft is 10 rounds, meaning that you'll have also 5 bench spots to work through and in and out of your lineup. And because it's best ball, you never have to make a start-sit decision or anything like that. Like I said, that is the 10 roster spots. Most of the common roster constructions that you guys are going to see from people is being centered around stacking. And stacking basically just means, if you're unaware, that you draft a bunch of players from the same team. And a lot of people will experiment with different builds. So, for example, if you think the 49ers and the Buffalo Bills will play each other in the Super Bowl, you might draft 3 49ers and 3 Buffalo Bills. That's 6 of your 10 spots. Because if those guys do play each other in the Super Bowl, you're going to need a startable quarterback in that game, 1 running back, 2 wide receivers and tight ends, and at least a flex. I'd say at bare minimum, you want to be rostering 5 players that are in the Super Bowl game, if not as many as humanly possible. It's not a plus EV move to try and just advance past the wild card round. You want to eventually get to the Super Bowl because all the money is stacked up at the top. You're aiming for that big prize pool, the 100K to first in the gauntlet, the 15K to first in the mitten tournament. Stacking is very important, and a lot of common roster construction builds you're going to see are basically, I'm going to go really slow on this so I don't confuse anybody. The 3-3-3-1, which basically means you would stack 3 players from one team, 3 players from another team, 3 players from a third team, and then potentially 1 player from a random team. Let's say you decide that the Super Bowl is going to be San Francisco and Buffalo. Like I said, you think that maybe in the AFC Championship, the Bills and Bengals will play against each other. So you go 3 Bills, 3 Bengals, 3 49ers, and let's say you just offhandedly grab a Dallas Cowboys player because you think they'll play the 49ers in the NFC Championship, for example. So that's a common build. You could also see a 3-3-2-2, which would be the same thing, except 2 players from an NFC team that you think is going to go far, 2 players from an AFC team that you think is going to go far, and then 3 players from your prospective Super Bowl team, and then 4-3-2-1 would also be kind of the same thing as well. So I'd say the most common builds and the most effective builds are probably 3-3-3-1s, 3-3-2-2s, 4-3-2-1s, and then 4-2-2-1. So that's kind of the builds that you want to be looking for at the end of your draft. You kind of want to look and see, okay, so I have 4 Buffalo Bills players, 2 San Francisco 49ers players, 2 Dallas Cowboys players, and 1 Cincinnati Bengals player, for example. That would probably qualify as a solid roster construction, set yourself up well to be able to advance in the tournament. ADP is heavily affected by the best teams as well. So a middling option like a Gabriel Davis, for example, will go much higher in the draft than a elite fantasy option like Austin Eckler, because Gabriel Davis's team is much more likely to go far in the playoffs and eventually make the Super Bowl. So that's another element of strategy that comes when you're deciding between players is, as good as Saquon Barkley is, he plays for the Giants. So even if they get into the playoffs, how likely are they to make it far in the playoffs, go past the wild card round, get into the divisional round, eventually make the NFC Championship? Probably not all that likely. So that's an important distinction to make as well. Now we're going to get into very specific team by team stuff. Again, I'm hopefully not confusing anybody. What you should come away with after this section is which team combinations you should and shouldn't be stacking. Ergo, if you start your draft stacking Cowboys, for example, you take CeeDee Lamb or Dak Prescott with one of your first picks, which team then should you pivot to draft to make sure that you're optimally building a team that won't mathematically cap your own upside? Because like I said, if you're drafting a lot of Cowboys, you don't want to draft a ton of Tampa Bay Buccaneers, because then half of those players will be eliminated after the first round, because those 2 teams are very likely to play in the first round. So we're going to start breaking down the teams that we can choose from in these playoff best ball tournaments, teams that have already made the playoffs, they've already secured their position, teams that are likely to make the playoffs but maybe necessarily haven't clinched yet, teams with big question marks that we don't know maybe who's going to win a certain division, and then maybe some of the dark horses that still mathematically have a chance to make the playoffs, but we're not entirely sure if they're going to be able to get in. So teams that have already made the playoffs, you can comfortably draft these players knowing that they will be in the first round or in the second round, at least if they are on bye. We know that these players are safe to draft. They will be in the playoffs. There's no concerns from that perspective. We have the Philadelphia Eagles, who have already clinched the playoffs, Buffalo Bills, Kansas City Chiefs, Minnesota Vikings, San Francisco 49ers, and Dallas Cowboys. We know that the Philadelphia Eagles are very likely to get a bye week, 99% chance. And we know that among the AFC teams, the bye week is likely to go to the Buffalo Bills or to the Kansas City Chiefs, mainly the Buffalo Bills as of right now. Then we have the teams that are likely to make the playoffs. These guys wouldn't obviously have a bye week, and we don't necessarily know where they would be seated quite yet, but it's relatively a safe bet knowing that they're 80% or better implied odds to make the playoffs. If you recall, this is where the 2021 Cincinnati Bengals would have been last year if I was doing this exercise, doing this video, because they were a 10-7 team that hadn't quite locked up their playoff destiny yet by week 16, where we're at right now. But knowing that they had a good roster and they were on a hot streak, people thought they were a good bet to eventually make a Super Bowl run, and that's exactly what happened. So teams like the Bengals, the Ravens, the Giants, and the Chargers haven't necessarily locked or clinched a playoff spot yet, but they are very likely to clinch a playoff spot. So you can also probably draft these players with relative certainty, knowing that they'll probably be in the playoffs. Then we have the big question marks, and all three of which are divisions around the NFL that we do not know who is going to win quite yet. We can make predictions based on schedule and based on how these teams are playing, but we don't know for sure. And this is where some of the strategy comes in, because the Jaguars-Titans game division, the AFC South, is likely going to be won by the Jacksonville Jaguars if I had to make a prediction, because of how they're playing versus how the Titans are playing and who the teams play. But maybe if you want to get unique, you want to draft some Tennessee Titans, whatever the case is, that definitely makes some sense. And same goes for the Buccaneers and Panthers division, the NFC South. It's very possible that the Tampa Bay Buccaneers sneak in at 8-9 and they're a berserker in the playoffs because they have Tom Brady. But if people draft with that assumption, then and the Bucs miss the playoffs and the Panthers make the playoffs, that's going to kill a lot of teams as well. So, and then the final biggest playoff question mark division is the AFC North, where the Bengals and Ravens situation is very interesting, because the winner of this division will either get the 3 seed, and then the loser will probably get the 5 seed, most likely. And that'll mean that the 3 seed is playing either the Chargers or the Dolphins as it currently stands, and the person that the 5 seed plays will be the AFC South winner. Like I said, either the Jags or the Titans, whoever ends up winning that. So a lot of strategy coming in, mixing up the seeding that you can stack up players. So then we have the dark horses, which is a thing that could throw a wrench into people's entries for people who are drafting right now, because some of these teams are going to sink people's rosters with dead players that didn't make the playoffs. And then some of these teams could end up being, let's say, what the San Francisco 49ers represented last year. Because if you guys recall, the San Francisco 49ers at this time last year in week 16 had a 12.5% chance of making the NFL playoffs. So if you drafted San Francisco 49ers players, then you probably won a decent amount of money, because not only did they make the playoffs, they actually made the NFC Championship. They beat the Dallas Cowboys in the wild card round, and then they eventually beat the Green Bay Packers in the divisional round, leading to them making it pretty far in the NFL playoffs as a late round team that people were stacking up. And you definitely got your money's worth if you were stacking 49ers. So I have the dark horses listed here, and based on their remaining opponents, based on their implied odds, I have which teams that you should invest in, which teams that maybe you should get some shares of, and then which teams I would probably be avoiding altogether. My favorite dark horses to invest in are the current 7 seed in the AFC Miami Dolphins, just given how talented of a team they are, given what their schedule is like. I think they're likely to make the playoffs, 72% chance. And once they get into the playoffs, they have these high-powered fantasy options, guys that can make a lot of noise from a fantasy perspective in the playoffs. And I think they can actually go far if they're able to win some games. Same goes for the Detroit Lions. They're playing well right now. They have some high-price fantasy options like Amon-Ra St. Brown, for example, who can make some noise. And then the Seahawks, the New York Jets, and the Cleveland Browns, also kind of interesting, but not all that interesting together. So moving on to how to stack properly. So that was kind of all the mumbo jumbo. That was all the playoff scenarios that we have to work through. I've basically ordered them based on who is most likely to be the 1 seed, who is most likely to be the 2 seed, etc. So the rankings that I have them listed in are the most likely seeds that we know for certain. So the Philadelphia Eagles are, on the NFC side of things, are the most likely seed that we can say, if we had to place a bet, throw the mortgage on it, which seed do we know right now that's going to end up staying the same? It's probably the Eagles being the 1 seed in the NFC, followed by the Vikings being the 2 seed, etc. there. So the Eagles have a 99% chance to secure a bye. They're probably going to be the 1 seed there. Ergo, if you draft them, you probably need to have plans in the first round to make sure you advance your Philadelphia Eagles players. Number 2, it's between Minnesota and San Francisco for the 2 seed. Minnesota is currently 1 game up on San Francisco, but San Francisco would have a tiebreaker because they have a better conference record than Minnesota. So that thing has to kind of work itself out. Number 5 seed, we know, is probably the Dallas Cowboys because they've already clinched the playoffs. They're 1.5 games up on the New York Giants as the current 6 seed. So they're probably going to be the 5 seed for sure. Number 6, we have the New York Giants. We know that they're probably going to be the 6th seed as well because they're 1 game up on Washington with a head-to-head tiebreaker, and they're 1.5 games up on Detroit and Seattle, who are currently in the hunt just trying to get into the playoffs. Number 4, the 4 seed we know is probably it's going to be the NFC South winner because both all these teams are terrible. But is it the Bucks or is it the Panthers? The Bucks are currently 1 game above Carolina for first place. They would just need to win 2 of their last 3 games and or beat Carolina to secure that seed. I personally think they're going to, but they're probably not going to do much in the playoffs. Number 7, we don't know who the 7 seed is going to be yet, but Detroit currently has the highest implied odds of making the playoffs, so we'd assume that they are probably the 7 seed. With Washington's tough schedule, plus Seattle's recent play, winner faces either Minnesota or San Francisco, depending on who the 2 seed is. So that's basically how you want to think about the seeding. So if you think, for example, if you're making the assumption that Detroit is going to make the playoffs, you know by drafting a Detroit player, you are making that assumption. You draft Amon-Ra St. Brown, let's say with your last pick or your second last pick, then you probably shouldn't stack him with Minnesota Vikings players who are the current 2 seed. So that's where the element of strategy comes in. Now let's get into the how to stack properly in the AFC side of things. As of right now, the NFC is much more clear in terms of seeding that we can expect. There's a few more risks that you can take in the AFC as a result. So I would say if you're going to take risks and draft a bunch of dark horse teams, it should be on the AFC side of things rather than the NFC side. So you guys can see the Buffalo Bills likely to be the 1 seed, etc. there. They have a 50% chance at a bye. If they're not the 1 seed, they're very likely to be the 2 seed. And same goes for Kansas City at the 2 seed right now. 41% chance at a bye. If they're not the 1 seed, they're very likely to be the 2 seed as well. The number 3 seed is the AFC North winner. Most likely, it's either going to go to Cincinnati or it's going to go to Baltimore. Cincinnati currently is in possession of it right now. They have a 1 game advantage on the Baltimore Ravens, but Baltimore does have a tiebreaker with a division record and a head-to-head win against Cincinnati. So it's possible that Baltimore reclaims that 3 seed. The number 6 seed is currently going to the Los Angeles Chargers. They play 3 non-playoff teams rest of the season, and they have a head-to-head tiebreaker versus the Miami Dolphins. So they could definitely sit at that spot for sure. And then number 4, we have the AFC South winner, the 4 seed. The Titans are 1 game up on the Jaguars right now, but the Jags have a head-to-head win against the Tennessee Titans, and the Titans have a harder schedule down the stretch, but they do have a divisional tiebreaker. So like I said, personally, I think the Jags are going to win that division, but we don't know for sure yet. And then the number 7 seed is the most up in the air of any seed in the playoff picture right now. The Miami Dolphins currently hold it. They have a 40% chance of keeping this seed. They face both New England and New York Jets the rest of the season, who are also in contention for this pick or for this seed. But I think they're just the best team remaining, and I think they're going to end up winning it. But I think if you're going to take your shots on the Jets, on the Browns, on the Raiders, on the Patriots, these type of teams. Because if they went on a run, if they ran the table and some things broke their way, then they could sneak into the playoffs and be very, very unique as well. So then we get into the likely NFL playoff picture. As of right now, if you guys are watching this video post week 16 or later, things may have changed, but I will have a link to an updated spreadsheet in the pinned comment down below that will be totally free for you guys to view. I'll post it on our Patreon, but I'll make it available for everybody to view. So if you want to check out the updated list, you guys can see it over there. The likely NFL playoff picture, as I've kind of broken down here. Hopefully people are still following me. We have the AFC seeding. Like I said, Buffalo, Kansas City likely to be the 1 and 2. Cincinnati, I think, is going to win the AFC North, so I think they will be the 3 seed. 4 seed, I think, will be Jacksonville. Baltimore, the 5 seed. Los Angeles Chargers, the 6 seed, and the Miami Dolphins, the 7 seed. I think that's how it's going to end up working out. Things can change, but that is my prediction as of right now. And then the NFC seeding, Philadelphia very likely to be the 1 seed, Minnesota and San Fran in some order, the 2 and 3. And then Tampa Bay, I think, will win the NFC South. Dallas probably locked into the 5 seed. New York Giants, I think, will be the 6 seed, pretty much locked into that as well. And then the Detroit Lions, the 7 seed. So that is my predictions basically for how the playoff seeding will work. I'm going to be operating under these assumptions when I do my own NFL playoff best ball drafts. And then finally, in the spreadsheet that will be linked below and updated weekly, I want to give you guys a checklist so that you can easily put this advice into action, because this was a very confusing video. So if you guys are in a draft, let's say you have a playoff best ball draft on one of your monitors and you have this spreadsheet on the other monitor, I want you to be able to easily implement some of the advice that I gave you in this video. So let's say you're at the 1-2 turn, you draft Justin Jefferson with your first pick. You now made that assumption that you think the Minnesota Vikings are going to go far in the playoffs and you want to target other Vikings players to stack up. But the question a lot of you guys are going to have is, who else should I stack up? If I don't have the brain capacity to remember all of these playoff scenarios and, okay, I drafted one Viking, does that mean I can't draft this team or that team? I will have that laid out for you in this checklist. Contending teams on the AFC side of things is the easy answer with who you should be drafting. Let's say if you draft a Minnesota Vikings player, because by making that bet that you think the Vikings are going to go far, you're obviously going to need an AFC team to go against them in the Super Bowl. And then, because I have this all mapped out, you don't want to be stacking up Vikings with the 6 or the 7 seed, for example, because they will likely be facing them as their first round opponents. So the New York Giants, Detroit Lions, and Seattle Seahawks, I probably would not stack up if I drafted Justin Jefferson. You'd also probably want to avoid stacking with San Francisco as well, because the Super Bowl odds dictate that San Francisco is likely going to win their matchup in round 1. The Eagles will play the winner of Bucs Cowboys, and then they'll probably be playing against the San Francisco 49ers, the Minnesota Vikings in round 2. Some of the best NFC teams to stack up with the Minnesota Vikings would be the Philadelphia Eagles, because their paths are not likely to cross throughout the playoffs. The Dallas Cowboys, same thing. And the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, same thing. So, and then I also included with each team a contrarian stack, because chaos happens in the NFL playoffs. And I think in these scenarios, you could gain a huge leg up on your competition and make your team builds very unique, in case we got, let's say, a New York Giants, Minnesota Vikings NFC championship, because mathematically it is possible. And we want to know that possibility going into these drafts, because if we want to get contrarian, or if we get sniped on whatever stack we were initially going for, we want to have options that we can pivot to. And I think the Giants are a perfect example, because if they were to beat San Francisco and beat Philadelphia in rounds 1 and 2, and same goes for the Vikings, if they were to win their first 2 rounds of matchups, then they could be playing each other in the NFC Championship, and that would be a very unique build that not a lot of people would have. So definitely something to keep in mind. That is just the example for the Minnesota Vikings. I have these mapped out for every single team. So if you draft Stephon Diggs, I'll have one for the Bills. If you draft, Jalen Hurts, I'll have one for the Eagles, and so on and so forth. That will be linked down below in the free spreadsheet over on our Patreon. And like I said, if you guys enjoyed this video, leave a like. If you feel like you got some value from it, leave me a comment down below. Subscribe to the channel if you are new. Use promo code FSE at UnderdogFantasy.com to get yourself a piece of the action on playoff best ball. 100% match back for using our promo code to get yourself some entries into these tournaments. And like I said, if you missed the announcement at the beginning of the video, if you use the code FSE before Christmas, and we can track that on the back end, then you will win one of 5 free $50 site credits. And we are not a big YouTube channel. Like I said, the last time we did a giveaway, only about 20 people signed up. So you have like a 25% chance or better of winning a $50 site credit by using that promo code FSE. Like I said, 100% match back on whatever you put in, and get yourself some entries into the NFL playoff best ball fun. With that being said, peace out, and we'll talk to you soon.
Wire me the money.